Now we are at the end now of our sermon series that we've been doing on parables in Big Church. Now just a reminder for some of you who've missed this, parables are stories that Jesus told. Now they seem like very simple stories. They're about things like banquets and seeds and farmers and fathers and sons. And Jesus would tell these stories and people think, oh, that's a really nice story. And they'd go home and they'd have their lunch, and perhaps as they were washing up or maybe shearing a sheep or paying their taxes, they'd have a moment where they'd be like, oh. They'd have that penny drop moment where they'd have a realization that perhaps Jesus wasn't talking about builders or about banquets after all. These parables Jesus was using as a way to tell his disciples and the people who were interested about him, about God, who God is, what he's like, what his kingdom is like, and how we as Jesus followers are to be and are to live. Now, like I say, we're at the end of this sermon series, and I don't know if, like me, you've come to the end, and there's been lots of moments of revelation, lots of moments where you've realised afresh actually what it means to live and be and sort of try and see God's kingdom on the earth. You know, we looked at the great banquet last week, and like George said, we're thinking, what if this church was seen more as a table that we can invite people to, and we are hosts who are called to invite people to this table. You know, I've been thinking about the prodigal son and how God welcomes us and loves us in our mess, and how we're called to do the same for others. I've got so many thoughts sort of swimming around about what I've, learned, what God has revealed in this time. And it seems like a fitting end to our parable series, because that's exactly the place these crowds found themselves in over 2,000 years ago when Jesus told this story. So Jesus, as we saw in the video, sat down on a mountain, and he had just preached a sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, exactly what it says on the tin. And you can read this sermon in Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5 to 7. If you've never read it, I really encourage you to have a read. It's Jesus giving really practical information on how his followers are to live. It talks about what to do with anger, when you're angry, what to do, how to speak to one another, how to forgive each other, what to do with your money, when to give. It talks about what to do if you're anxious. It talks about savings, all these sort of practical life things Jesus has been speaking into in this sermon. And then, just before the people are about to leave, just before they're about to go and get on with their day, sort of the same place we're in, just as we're about to go into a new term at school, perhaps just as we're about to go back to work, perhaps after a holiday, maybe just after a weekend, or even if we're just sort of going back to the everyday of our lives, this is the point that Jesus chooses to tell this parable. And so, we're going to pause for just a few minutes to see what he might want to say to us today. Now, you may have not noticed, but the video we watched wasn't sort of verbatim what was in the Bible. So I am going to read from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. So it says this: "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundations on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So, I'm going to take a few minutes to look at the difference between this wise and foolish man and what God might want to say to us. Now, audience participation is nowhere near over. You'll be pleased to know. Can I have a volunteer? Oh! You are saving me today, Sam and Heidi. Come on up. Now, one of you gets to play the fool, one of you gets to play the wise man. Oh! Shouldn't Eddie? Oh, George, you can't say that about your church warden. So, right, if you stand here with your hats on, Heidi is representing the wise man. Sam is representing the fool. We are not saying Sam is a fool, he is representing the fool. Now, we're going to think about two differences between the wise man and the foolish man. One of them does what is right in this story. One of them does what is easy. Can I have someone to suggest who should have which piece of paper? Paper, yes, Sienna. Tough crowd. Sam, Heidi, which piece of paper would you like?
Tough.
You want to do what's right, you want to do what's easy. Wonderful. So, I'm going to knock this towel down so you can see. So, in our story, we have the foolish man who does what is easy. So the foolish man built his house on the sand. Now, I've been to the beach. I know that for a house, you have to make some foundations, whatever you're building on. If I'm at the beach and I dig the sand, that's relatively easy. I can dig down, make some nice foundations, and build my house. But it didn't go so well for that foolish man. As the story says, the storms came and the house fell down. So he wasn't doing what was right. He chose what was easy, enjoyed it for a while, and then the storms came and it all went wrong. The wise man, however, chose to build on the stone. Now, I'm not claiming to have ever dug into stone to build some foundations. I've seen those pneumatic drills do it by the side of the road, the ones that are like, and it looks hard work even for the drill. So I think if it's hard work for a drill, it's probably hard work for a man. But this is what the wise man does, because he knows that building these foundations is really important. So the wise man does what is right, and what we see is that when the storm comes, the wise man's house still stands. So if you two are happy just to stand there for a minute, I just want to talk into this point for a moment. We're often faced with situations in life, whether it's at school, at work, at home, just as we're going about our day-to-day life, where we're faced with choices. Do we do the easy thing, or do we do the thing that we know is right? And you might be sat there thinking, well, how can you tell me what's right? You don't know me, you don't know what's right for me. You know, so much of society today is all about, it's your own truth, it's whatever feels good for you, as long as you don't hurt other people, that's the right thing. But actually, we're in this room today either as Jesus followers, people who've decided to follow Jesus, become Christians, or we're here because we're vaguely interested. And if you're here for any other reason, then what I'm saying doesn't really apply, because Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, is talking to those people, the crowd, his disciples who have chosen to follow him, and the crowds who are interested. And he does, in the Sermon on the Mount, give directives. He does say, this is what you should do with your money. This is what you should do with worry. This is what you should do with forgiveness. So we've got the words of Jesus. We've got his example, how he lived his life. We read about that in the Gospels. And then we've also got the Holy Spirit that he has given us to lead us, to guide us, to sort of prompt us, convict us, so that we know in different situations, we have a sense of what is the right thing to do. And I don't think we should be afraid of the fact that sometimes there is a right thing to do. God made us. He knows us. He knows what is best for us. He said that he's come that we might have life, and life in all its fullness. So actually, I'm going to trust him. Even if I sometimes can't quite figure out the details, how does this link? Actually, God said this is the best way to live your life. This is the best thing to do with your body. This is the best thing to do with your finances. Then I'm going to trust him. And that's what he's called us to do. That's what he says in this parable. If we put his words into action, then we will be like this wise man who, when the storms come, and the storms come whether or not you follow Jesus. That's a reality that's illustrated in this story. But the promise is if we trust in God and we put his words into action, that we will weather those storms. Okay, second thing I want to just have a look at. So I'll take those signs from you because we're going to struggle, just these ones, we're going to struggle to hold everything. The next difference is that one of these, I imagine, this isn't in the text, so just allow me this a little bit. I imagine cared more about what other people thought, and one of them probably cared a little bit more about what God thought. What would you like? Very good. Excellent. These are the best volunteers I've ever had. So, this makes me think of Noah. Noah was someone else in the Bible who built something. So Noah heard from God and felt that God called him to build an ark. Now, Noah didn't live by the sea, where sort of building a boat, you'd be like, yeah, okay, people sort of can understand that. It wasn't even like forecast to rain any time in the future. He lived like in the middle of a desert and he was building this boat. Now, I don't think I could have done that. I think, in all honesty, I would really struggle if that's what I felt God... I mean, we even live by a river, but if God told me to build a boat, I think I'd struggle. But Noah was so focused on what God thought about him, being obedient to God, that actually the opinions of others didn't matter. And I really think that's what we, as followers of Jesus, we need. And this is a work of his Spirit, because we all care what other people think. I think it's human nature. But we're called to surrender that, to not care what other people think, but to care what God thinks and do what God is calling us to do. And, you know, Jesus says this is to be a foundation that we build our life on. Putting his words into action is to be a foundation of our lives. Not like an added extra when you're around a certain group of people and you want to seem a little bit holy, so you're going to sort of add it on there. Jesus is like, that's not going to work. What I'm calling you to is this being a foundation, this changing everything in your life and reorientating everything around me and how I've asked you to live. You know, it's total surrender. You give everything. It costs to do this. It really costs. If you're serious about this, it really costs. You give everything, but the promise is we get everything in return. Life in all of its fullness. More peace, more joy, more love. And again, I've said this before, but this is the crux of it. And God promises that when the storms come, you know, many of you in this room can attest to the fact it's not plain sailing. You know, storms do come. But God promises that he will be with us, and he promises that he will lead us in those storms. Amen. Thank you so much. You can go and have your seat. You can keep your crown if you like. Well done.